It was supposed to be just another Sunday in the quiet town of Clayton, North Carolina. The kind of day where church bells drift through open windows and children chase each other down tree-lined streets. But by sunset on September 21st, 1997, one young woman's life would vanish into thin air, and the people of Johnson County would be left asking a question that still echoes decades later. What really happened to Abby Patterson? When her mother, Linda, knocked on Abby's bedroom door that night, the light was still on, the bed perfectly made, makeup on the dresser, her Bible open on the nightstand. But Abby, the 19-year-old with a laugh that could fill a room, was gone. Her car sat in the driveway, keys still in the ignition. Her purse lay on the passenger seat. And in the small town where everyone knew everyone, her disappearance felt like a nightmare that couldn't possibly be real. Before long, flyers were plastered on storefronts, gas stations, and church bulletin boards. Volunteers combed through fields and riverbanks, searching for any sign of her. But the more they looked, the less they found. Abby Patterson seemed to have disappeared without a trace. And as detectives dug deeper, they realized this wasn't just a missing person case. It was something much darker. But before we dive into the mystery, if you enjoy stories like this, real, emotional, and haunting, make sure to subscribe and share these videos. It helps us keep these stories alive, and sometimes it helps bring answers that families have waited years to hear. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Who was Abby Patterson? Abigail Abby Patterson was born on a warm May morning in 1978. She was the only child of Linda and Mark Patterson, two hardworking, middle-class parents who raised her with small-town values and big dreams. Clayton wasn't the kind of place you expected tragedy. The people there knew each other by name. Doors were left unlocked, pies cooled on windowsills, and everyone gathered at the same diner on Friday nights. Abby grew up right in the heart of that. Her friends used to say she was the sunshine of Clayton. She had a way of turning ordinary moments into something memorable. Whether it was leading Sunday school for the younger kids or volunteering at the animal shelter, Abby had that rare warmth that made you feel seen. Her mother, Linda, would later say in interviews that Abby wasn't perfect. She had her stubborn streaks, but she was good, a good daughter, a loyal friend, and someone who always believed in second chances. In high school, Abby had been on the cheerleading squad. She wasn't the loudest, but she had this quiet confidence about her, the kind that drew people in. Her smile could disarm anyone, and when she laughed, it was almost musical. After graduating in 1996, Abby decided to stay close to home for college. She enrolled at Johnson Community College, majoring in early childhood education. She dreamed of becoming a kindergarten teacher one day. Abby loved kids, her mother would say. She said they made her feel hopeful, like the world wasn't so broken after all. But while she was a picture of optimism on the outside, those close to her knew Abby had been carrying something heavy beneath the surface. Her father, Mark, had passed away in a tragic construction accident just months before her high school graduation. It was the kind of loss that leaves a shadow, even on the brightest soul. Abby was only 18 at the time, and it changed her. She became quieter, more introspective. Some nights she'd sit out on the porch swing for hours, staring at the sky, say she felt like her dad was still watching over her. And as 1997 rolled around, just over a year after her father's death, Abby had begun trying to piece her life back together. She started attending college classes again, going to youth group, even dating a little. Her mother said it finally felt like Abby was coming back to herself. But the truth was, Abby's world was more complicated than anyone realized. In the summer of 1997, Abby started spending time with a small circle of friends outside her usual crowd, older teens and early 20s locals who hung around the edge of town. Some of them had reputations for partying, and a few had minor run-ins with the law. It wasn't like Abby to drift toward that scene. She'd always been the responsible one, the girl who made sure everyone got home safe after a night out. But maybe grief makes us seek different kind of comfort. There were whispers that she'd been seeing someone, a man named Ryan McCall, 23 years old, worked part-time at a garage, known for his charm and trouble in equal measure. Ryan wasn't a bad guy, people said, but he had a temper and a tendency to disappear when things got messy. He and Abby had met through mutual friends at a summer cookout, and by all accounts, they hit it off fast. To her mom, Ryan was polite, even respectful, but something about him made Linda uneasy. He had those eyes, she later said, like he was thinking of something he didn't want you to know. Abby brushed off the concerns. She said Ryan just needed someone to believe in him. That was Abby, always believing in the good, even when others couldn't see it. In the weeks before she vanished, things in Abby's life seemed unsettled. She had dropped one of her college classes unexpectedly. She'd missed a few Sunday church services. Her best friend, Erin, said she'd seemed distracted, like she was carrying a secret she didn't know how to share. On September 20th, the night before she disappeared, Abby and Erin went to a small get-together at a friend's trailer just outside town. Nothing unusual, a handful of people, some music, a few beers. Abby wasn't much of a drinker, but Erin said she laughed that night, danced even. She seemed happy. At one point, Erin recalled seeing Ryan pull Abby aside outside the trailer. They talked quietly near the gravel road. Erin couldn't hear what was said, but she noticed Abby's expression, something between worry and relief. When Erin asked later, Abby just said, "It's fine. Everything's going to be fine." Those would be some of the last words she ever heard from her. Sunday, September 21st, 1997, began like any other morning. The Patterson household was quiet. Linda had made pancakes and was getting ready for church. Abby came downstairs wearing her favorite pale yellow sundress, the one her father had bought her for graduation. They talked about simple things, groceries, church, and a letter Abby had received from the college about volunteering at a local daycare. At around 11 a.m., Abby told her mom she was going to meet a friend before the evening service. She didn't say who. Linda assumed it was Erin. But when Erin called around noon asking if Abby was home, her mother realized something was off. By 2 p.m., Abby hadn't returned calls. By 6 p.m., her car was found in the driveway, but Abby wasn't inside. Her keys were in the ignition, as though she'd just stepped out for a moment. Her purse, with her wallet, makeup, and ID, was on the seat. But Abby was gone. Linda called everyone she could think of. Erin, Ryan, the church youth pastor. No one had seen her. By 10 p.m., she called the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. Officers arrived within minutes. They began the standard missing person report. Recent photos, last known whereabouts, friends, phone numbers. But what struck the officers most was how normal everything seemed. There were no signs of struggle. No sign Abby had packed anything. It was as if she'd simply vanished into the air. That night, Linda sat on Abby's bed clutching her Bible, whispering her name like a prayer. "She'll come back," she said. "She always comes back." But as the hours turned into days, that hope began to crumble. The disappearance of Abby Patterson hit Clayton like a storm. Within 24 hours, her picture was everywhere. A smiling brunette with soft green eyes and a dimple on her left cheek. Local volunteers formed search parties. Deputies scoured the woods, fields, and creeks. Helicopters flew overhead. Nothing. At the gas station on Main Street, people left candles and flowers beside a printed photo of Abby taped to the wall. The caption read, "Bring Abby home." Even local news stations picked up the story. For a town that rarely made headlines, the idea of a young woman vanishing with no explanation was unthinkable. Every night, Linda would appear on camera, voice trembling but firm. "If anyone has my daughter, please, just let her come home." Behind the scenes, detectives were already starting to question people in Abby's life. Ryan McCall told officers he hadn't seen her that day, said they'd taken a break the week before. But his story had inconsistencies. He claimed to have been working on a car that afternoon, but his boss couldn't confirm it. Then there were Abby's phone records. A single outgoing call around 11:10 a.m. to a payphone near the outskirts of town. After that, silence. When investigators checked the area, they discovered something chilling. Tire tracks leading off the dirt road into a patch of woods. But no body, no clothing, no evidence, just traces. And traces can be just enough to tell a story. if you know how to listen. If you've been following this story so far, take a moment to share it or comment where you're watching from. Stories like Abby's remind us that behind every headline is a family still searching for answers. Now, we'll dive into the investigation, the evidence, the suspects, and the strange coincidences that turn a quiet missing person case into one of North Carolina's most haunting mysteries. Because the truth about what happened to Abby Patterson was darker than anyone could have imagined. It's been 2 days since Abby Patterson vanished. In Clayton, the world hadn't stopped spinning, but it sure felt slower. The hum of daily life dulled beneath a blanket of worry. Mothers held their daughters closer. Teenagers suddenly obeyed curfews. Strangers stopped each other on sidewalks just to ask, "Have they found her yet?" They hadn't, and what began as a hopeful search had started turning into something darker, a creeping realization that Abby Patterson wasn't just lost. She was missing. By the 3rd day, the Johnson County Sheriff's Department had turned Abby's quiet street into a command post. Patrol cars lined the curb. Deputies walked the ditches with flashlights even in daylight, eyes scanning for any sign, a footprint, a piece of fabric, anything. Search dogs were brought in from Raleigh. Their handlers led them through nearby woods, down to the banks of the Neuse River. The dogs sniffed her clothing, barked briefly, then led officers down a narrow dirt trail that cut through the trees. The trail ended near the old Carter Bridge, where local teens sometimes went to hang out. For a moment, it felt like a lead, but the scent stopped cold at the edge of the bridge. No body, no signs of struggle, just the sound of the river rushing beneath. To the searchers, it was both a clue and a cruelty, as if Abby had walked that far and then simply evaporated. For days in, the sheriff's office held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Sheriff Douglas White stood before reporters, his voice steady but heavy. "We're doing everything possible to locate Abby Patterson," he said. "At this time, we have no evidence of foul play, but we're treating this as a suspicious disappearance." Behind him, Linda Patterson stood in a pale blue blouse, holding a framed picture of Abby smiling at her high school graduation. The wind blew through her hair as she spoke softly into the microphones. "Abby, sweetheart, if you can see this, if you can hear me, please come home. We just want you safe." That clip would air on every local station that night. And across North Carolina, people saw her, a mother clinging to hope while the world seemed to tilt out of place. Inside the sheriff's office, a small task force had been formed. Lead Detective Mike Sanderson was put in charge, a seasoned officer in his 40s, known for his methodical style and calm under pressure. The first step was to rebuild Abby's last 24 hours, moment by moment. They started with the phone records. The last outgoing call, 11:10 a.m., from Abby's home phone to a payphone located off Highway 42. Detectives visited the location. The payphone stood beside a rundown gas station, surrounded by cracked pavement and weeds. The clerk on duty, a man named Billy Dunn, remembered seeing a young woman in a yellow dress that morning. "She looked like she was waiting for someone," he said. Kept glancing down the road. He couldn't remember seeing anyone meet her. But across the street was a small gravel lot, a popular spot for carpooling or quick exchanges. And that's where officers found the tire marks. They were faint but distinct and matched the tread of a mid-90s Ford pickup. Detective Sanderson brought Ryan McCall in for questioning the following afternoon. Ryan arrived in a faded black hoodie, chewing on his thumb nervously. His voice was even at first, almost rehearsed. He said he and Abby had broken up the week before, said they hadn't spoken since. He'd spent Sunday working on a friend's truck at his garage on Elm Street. But when detectives checked with his boss, the story fell apart. The garage was closed on Sundays. When they confronted him, Ryan's composure cracked. He looked down, rubbed his hands together. "Okay, look," he said. "She called me that morning. She wanted to meet. I told her I couldn't. I was tired of the drama." "Drama?" Sanderson asked. Ryan hesitated. "She thought someone was following her. Said she'd been getting calls from a block number. I told her to chill out. Then she hung up." That was the first time anyone had heard that Abby believed she was being followed. The revelation changed everything. Detectives obtained Abby's phone records again, this time looking for incoming calls. between September 15th and 20th. There were 7 calls from a restricted number. Each lasted under a minute. They traced what they could to the phone company, but this was 1,997. Caller ID blocking was easy to exploit, and tracking wasn't as advanced as it is today. Still, they managed to find one unblocked attempt. A payphone from a rest stop outside Smithfield, about 20 miles away. That payphone had no security cameras, but an attendant remembered seeing a man using it, tall, wearing a cap pulled low, driving a dark pickup truck, a Ford, the same tread pattern as the tire tracks near where Abby was last seen. As investigators chased leads, the rumor mill spun faster than ever. Some said Abby had run off to escape small-town life. Others whispered that she'd been caught up with the wrong crowd, that she'd known more about certain people in town than she should have. At the diner, at the post office, in church pews, everyone had a theory. Linda tried to ignore them. But how do you ignore whispers about your missing child? At night, she'd sit by Abby's door, listening for footsteps that never came. The hardest part wasn't knowing if Abby was alive or dead. It was not knowing anything at all. By the end of the second week, hundreds of volunteers had joined the search. Farmers lent their trucks. Teens printed flyers. The local radio station broadcast Abby's description every hour. 19 years old, 5'6", brown hair, green eyes. Last seen wearing a yellow sundress. Helicopters flew over rural patches of land, focusing on wooded areas and old farm roads. Divers were even sent into sections of the Neuse River, guided by sonar. Nothing, not a trace. And that's when the FBI got involved. They had resources the small-town department didn't. Access to forensics labs, behavioral profilers, and digital analysis. The case was officially reclassified as a missing person under suspicious circumstances. 3 weeks into the search, Linda received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, lined notebook paper, written in black ink. She shouldn't have trusted him. The handwriting was jagged, almost childlike. Police dusted the letter for prints. Nothing. They traced the postmark to Fayetteville, about an hour away. But that was as far as they got. Was it a cruel prank? Or a message? Detective Sanderson leaned toward the former. But he couldn't ignore the possibility that someone out there knew exactly what had happened. By October, the story of Abby Patterson had reached beyond North Carolina. National news picked it up, the girl who vanished in broad daylight. Reporters flooded the small town. They interviewed locals, speculated on leads, even broadcast from in front of the Patterson home. Linda did one televised interview with a reporter from WRAL News. "They can say what they want," she said. "I just know Abby didn't run away. She called me that morning before she left. Said she'd be back for dinner. She sounded fine." Her voice broke on that last word. Fine. Sometimes that's the cruelest word in the English language, because it means everything and nothing at once. As weeks passed, Sanderson began piecing together a theory. Abby had received multiple calls from a blocked number. She told her boyfriend she thought someone was following her. On the day she vanished, she went to meet someone at a gas station and never came back. Whoever she met likely knew her, someone she trusted enough to get into their car. Sanderson's team began digging into her social circle, classmates, co-workers, church acquaintances. One name caught his attention, Jason Weller. 28 years old, part-time mechanic, lived in a trailer outside town. He had a minor criminal record, trespassing, disorderly conduct, and a charge for stalking an ex-girlfriend that had been dismissed. Jason had been seen at the same cookout where Abby and Ryan first met. When police interviewed him, he claimed he barely knew Abby. But when they searched his property, they found something chilling, a bracelet buried beneath the gravel near his porch. A delicate silver bracelet engraved with the initials AP. Linda confirmed it was Abby's. For the first time, the investigation had physical evidence. Clayton wasn't the same after that discovery. Jason Weller was brought in for questioning again, but without more evidence, they couldn't charge him. He was released within 48 hours. The townspeople were furious. Some shouted outside the sheriff's office. Others demanded justice online, though online in 1997 meant message boards and local forums. still primitive but powerful enough to spread outrage. Linda began receiving anonymous calls late at night, people claiming they'd seen Abby or heard things. Most were false. Some were cruel, but one stood out. A woman's voice, trembling, whispered, "Check the old quarry outside town before hanging up." Police searched the quarry. They found tire marks, again Ford tread pattern, but still no Abby. By November, 2 months had passed. Leaves had turned red and gold. The nights grew cold. The Patterson home stayed lit through every one of them. Linda refused to take down Abby's posters. She'd sit on the porch swing in the evenings, wrapped in her late husband's jacket, staring at the road. Neighbors dropped off food she didn't eat. Church members prayed over her, but she said prayer felt different now, heavier, quieter. "I still talk to her," she said to a local reporter once. "Every night. I tell her what the weather's like. I tell her I love her. I tell her I'm not mad if she ran off. I just need to know she's okay." That clip became one of the most haunting in the coverage, and it stayed with everyone who watched it. By December, winter was setting in, and the search for Abby Patterson had gone cold, at least officially. But in Clayton, the silence was deafening. Detective Sanderson kept a photo of Abby on his desk, right beside his coffee mug. Every morning, before logging another dead-end lead, he'd glance at her picture, that bright, dimpled smile, and remind himself that behind every case file was a person. He'd seen runaways before. He'd seen crimes of passion, overdoses, accidents. But this felt different. Abby's case wasn't chaos. It was precision. Someone had known exactly how to make her disappear. And somewhere out there, that person was still free. If you're still here, thank you for watching and caring about Abby's story. These videos aren't just about tragedy. They're about memory. When we talk about people like Abby, we make sure they're never forgotten. In the next part, we'll move into the twist, when new evidence resurfaces years later, reopening the case and revealing secrets that no one in Clayton was ready to face. Because sometimes the truth doesn't stay buried. It just waits for the right storm to uncover it. Clayton, North Carolina. 5 years later. It's the summer of 2002. Time, they say, dulls pain. But for Linda Patterson, time didn't dull anything. It only hollowed her out. The posters were long gone now. The media had moved on. Abby's face, once printed on every pole and gas station window, had faded into memory. But the house on Willow Creek Road still felt the same. The curtains in Abby's room still hung open, letting in the morning light. The alarm clock on her dresser still blinked 12 o'clock. Frozen from the day the power went out during that first frantic week of searching. Linda never reset it. She said it marked the moment her world stopped turning. It was July 18th, just after dawn, when 2 fishermen on the Neuse River made a call to the sheriff's office. They'd found something floating near the bank, a small metal lockbox, rusted, half covered in silt. Deputies arrived and pulled it from the water. The lock had corroded away, so they pried it open carefully with a screwdriver. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Most were weather damaged, warped by moisture. But a few were clear enough to make out, and what they showed stopped everyone cold. In several of the photos, there was a young woman, brown hair, green eyes, smiling near a familiar riverside bridge. The same bridge where the search dogs had lost Abby scent in 1997. And in one picture, barely visible in the corner, was a reflection in a car mirror. A man's face. Detective Mike Sanderson had retired 3 years earlier, but when he got called that morning, he didn't hesitate. He drove straight to the scene. When he saw the photos laid out on the evidence table, he went pale. "That's her," he said quietly. "That's Abby Patterson." The photos were time-stamped September 21st, 1997, the day she vanished. The sheriff's office reactivated the old case file. A new detective, Sarah Connors, took the lead, but she asked Sanderson to assist as a consultant. Together, they reviewed the original evidence. The payphone calls, the tire tracks, the anonymous letter, the bracelet. Sarah noticed something odd in the new photos, a pattern on the man's jacket sleeve, a stitched logo half visible. With some digital enhancement, they made it out. Weller Automotive, the same shop where Jason Weller had once worked part-time. For 5 years, Jason had kept a low profile. After being questioned and released back in '97, he'd left Clayton for a while, then returned quietly. He now lived about 10 miles out of town, on an isolated property near the woods. When deputies showed up at his house again, he was calm, too calm. He told them he'd never seen those photos before, said he didn't even own a camera. But when investigators searched his shed, they found an old Kodak roll of undeveloped film hidden inside a tin can buried behind paint cans. When developed, the images were almost identical to the ones from the river, except for one crucial difference. In these, Abby wasn't smiling. She looked scared. The news hit Clayton like a second storm. After 5 years of quiet, the whispers returned, sharper this time, tinged with anger. Locals who'd once defended Jason started to turn. The barbershop crowd, the churchgoers, even his old friends avoided him. Linda, on the other hand, stayed silent. She'd learned not to speak too soon, not after so many false hopes. But deep down she knew. She'd known since the day they found Abby's bracelet in his yard. "You don't bury something that isn't meant to stay hidden," she told a reporter who came by that week. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. While re-examining his background, Detective Connors discovered something chilling. In 1999, 2 years after Abby disappeared, Jason had been briefly detained in South Carolina for trespassing on property of another young woman, 21 years old. She reported seeing him parked outside her apartment multiple times, watching her through the window. He was released after posting bond. Charges dropped due to lack of evidence. Sound familiar? The behavioral profiler assigned to the case believed Jason fit the pattern of a situational stalker, someone who fixates on women who show kindness or attention, then becomes obsessed when they withdraw. They theorized that Abby's friendliness at that cookout years ago had triggered something in him. Maybe he followed her after that. Maybe the calls she received, the ones from block numbers, were him. And maybe the meeting at the gas station was never with her boyfriend at all. Maybe it was with Jason. The photos from the river were sent to the FBI's Forensics Division in Quantico. Using advanced scanning, they discovered trace fibers embedded in the edges. Synthetic carpet fibers, beige in color, common in vehicle interiors. Cross-referencing manufacturer data narrowed it down to 4 models between 1992 and 1996. Jason Weller had once owned a 1994 Ford F-150. He'd sold it in 1998 to a salvage yard just outside of town. The truck was long gone, but records showed one detail that made Detective Connor's stomach drop. The vehicle had been sold for scrap exactly 1 week after the first search of Weller's property back in 1997. That wasn't coincidence. That was cover-up. Sometimes justice doesn't come through evidence. It comes through guilt. In the fall of 2002, one of Jason's former co-workers from Weller Automotive came forward with a story. He said that the week Abby went missing, Jason showed up late to work, agitated, quiet, hands trembling. He'd washed his truck thoroughly before coming in, something he'd never done before. When asked why, Jason just said, "Had to clean up a mess." At the time, his co-worker thought nothing of it. But when the photos surfaced years later, the memory hit him like a freight train. That statement was enough to obtain a search warrant for Jason's current property. What they found in his crawl space ended all doubt. It wasn't a body, but it was enough. Inside a rusted metal box, sealed with duct tape, they found a stack of old cassette tapes, each labeled with a date, September 10th through September 21st, 1997. Only one had survived the years intact. When played, it began with faint static, then a woman's voice. Abby's voice. She was talking calmly, as if unaware of being recorded, asking questions, laughing nervously. Then, minutes later, her tone changed. Panic. She said, "Please, Jason, I want to go home." Then silence. Detectives didn't play the rest aloud. They didn't need to. That tape was all the jury would ever need. Jason Weller was arrested on August 6, 2002, and charged with first-degree murder and unlawful confinement. When deputies came for him, he didn't resist, didn't speak. He just looked at them and said, "You can't prove what's not there." It was true. No body had ever been found. But the law doesn't always need a body. And the evidence, the photos, the tape, the bracelet, painted a picture too clear to ignore. When his mugshot hit the evening news, Linda Patterson sat in her living room, staring at the screen. Her hands trembled, but her face stayed still. She whispered, "I knew it." The trial began in early 2003. The courtroom was packed every day. Townsfolk, reporters, even strangers who just wanted to see justice done. The defense argued there was no physical proof of Abby's death. They called it an obsession, not a murder. But the prosecution painted a different picture, one of control, fixation, and cold calculation. When the cassette tape played in court, you could hear a pin drop. One juror later said she had to look away. After 8 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for 9 hours. They returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Jason Weller was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He never admitted what he did with Abby's body. For Linda, the verdict brought relief, but not peace. She visited Abby's room that night for the first time in months, dusted the shelves, straightened the bedspread. Then she sat on the edge and whispered, "They found him, sweetheart. They found the man who took you." The air felt different. Lighter, maybe, or maybe it was just her heart, finally loosening after 5 long years. Abby Patterson's case became a quiet legend in Clayton, a reminder that even small towns hide darkness in their corners. And though justice came late, it came steady. 5 years after she vanished, a river gave up its secret, and with it, the truth that had been waiting all along. Sometimes, it's not the evidence that finds you. It's time, and the things that refuse to stay buried. If you've been following Abby's story, take a moment to share it. Every like, every comment, every share helps keep the memory of the missing alive. Because for every solved case, there are still hundreds waiting. And sometimes, the smallest voice can bring the loudest echo. The morning of Jason Weller's arrest felt surreal. For Linda Patterson, it was a moment she had waited 5 long years for, a closure that seemed almost too late, yet desperately needed. She sat in the passenger seat of her old Ford, gripping the steering wheel, her hands shaking. When the deputies led Jason out in handcuffs, his face was blank. No remorse, no struggle, just a hollow stare. In that moment, the town of Clayton collectively exhaled. The man who had haunted their streets, their homes, and the Patterson family for half a decade was finally contained. Yet, even as he was led away, the weight of what happened didn't lift. Abby Patterson was still gone. The courtroom was tense, the kind of quiet that made every footstep echo like a hammer. The prosecution laid out the evidence meticulously. The photograph from the river, the bracelet buried in Jason's yard, and the haunting cassette tape that revealed Abby's last, terrified words. Witnesses described Jason's obsession, his minor offenses, his patterns of stalking. For 5 years, he had evaded justice, hiding in plain sight, leaving only faint traces behind. The defense argued there was no body, no murder scene, no definitive proof Abby had been killed. But the jury didn't need a body to see the truth. The meticulousness of Jason's actions, the psychological evidence, and the damning recordings were enough. After hours of deliberation, the verdict came: guilty on all counts. Life imprisonment without parole. Linda sat in the back of the courtroom, tears streaming down her face. Relief mixed with grief, because finally justice was served. But Abby was still gone. For the Patterson family, the years that followed were a mix of mourning and resilience. Linda found herself retreating at first. Her world reduced to the walls of her home, the memories of her daughter, and the soft echo of her laughter in her mind. She joined support group for families of missing persons and murder victims, finding solace in the shared grief of others. "It's not about forgetting," she would later say in interviews. "It's about learning to carry it without breaking." The town of Clayton itself changed. The small, quiet streets that had once felt safe were now shadowed by a memory of fear. Parents were hypervigilant. Teens learned early that the world had corners where danger hid in plain sight. And yet, amidst the fear, there was a sense of community that grew stronger. Neighbors checking in on one another, local businesses rallying to support victims' families, churches opening their doors to anyone in need. Abby's disappearance and Jason's arrest became a cautionary tale, a story repeated in hushed voices at local diners and on porches, a reminder that evil could be disguised behind the mundane. Inside the walls of the North Carolina State Correctional Facility, Jason Weller spent his days in a routine of confinement. He had no visitors, no friends, and no means to undo the past. Prison guards noted that he remained eerily silent most days, often staring at blank walls for hours. Some nights, he spoke in his sleep, muttering Abby's name or fragments of her laughter. Psychologists who evaluated him described a man haunted, not by guilt, but by obsession that failed to yield the control he sought. Yet, even within the strict confines of prison, the law could not compel him to reveal the truth of what had happened to Abby. The question of her final resting place remained unanswered, a cruel void that haunted Linda and the investigators alike. For Linda, healing was never about forgetting or moving on. It was about preserving Abby's memory and ensuring that her daughter's story would not vanish. She started volunteering with local missing person advocacy groups, speaking at schools and community centers about the importance of awareness, vigilance, and compassion. She met other families whose loved ones had disappeared, forming bonds that helped carry the unbearable weight of grief. "Abby's gone, yes," she said once to a reporter, "but she's not invisible. Her story matters. If sharing can save one life or bring one family hope, then her life and her memory continues." Linda also worked tirelessly to maintain Abby's room as it had been, a quiet sanctuary of color, warmth, and presence. Friends often teased her for being stuck in the past, but she didn't care. To her, the past was the only place she could feel her daughter near. Clayton marked the 5th anniversary of Abby's disappearance with a small vigil at the Riverside Bridge where search parties had once scoured. Candles flickered against the night sky, and families gathered to remember all those who had been lost. Some of Abby's childhood friends spoke of her laughter, her kindness, the way she made every small moment magical. Others simply lit candles in silence. "She was bright, full of life," said Aaron, Abby's best friend. "And even though she's gone, she left behind something we can't lose. The way she made us care about each other, the way she made us notice the good." For the town, Abby became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of resilience, of the community's ability to endure, to confront darkness, and to insist on justice even when answers took years to arrive. Abby Patterson's story does not end neatly. Her body was never found. The echoes of her life remain in photographs, memories, and the testimony that brought Jason Weller to justice. Her disappearance left scars on Clayton, on her family, and on every neighbor who had hoped to see her walk home again. Yet in the silence left behind, there is also meaning. Her story reminds us that even in small towns, ordinary days can hide extraordinary danger, and that vigilance, community, and love are the strongest defenses we have. We can't change what happened, Linda said in a 2005 interview, but we can honor her life by remembering her, by fighting for the missing, by refusing to let their stories be forgotten. Abby's name lives on, in her mother's voice, in the town's memory, in the cautious but loving eyes of a generation that grew up hearing her story. Because sometimes survival is not measured by who returns, but by who refuses to let them be erased from the world. And Abby Patterson, though gone, has never been forgotten. If you followed her story, share it, because remembering is how we honor those who vanish, how we keep hope alive, and how we remind the world that every missing person matters. Years had passed since Jason Weller was arrested, since the courtroom had echoed with the jury's verdict, since Linda Patterson had sat in her daughter's room staring at photographs of Abby's smile. But for Clayton, North Carolina, the story of Abby Patterson was not something that faded with time. For Linda, every day remained a careful balance between grief and purpose. She had begun organizing annual community events in Abby's memory, candlelight vigils by the river, charity walks, and informational sessions about missing persons. These were not just memorials. They were calls to action. Abby's story taught me that silence is dangerous, Linda told a local news station in 2008. It doesn't matter how small your town is. Danger exists. And the more we talk about it, the safer we make our children. The Patterson home remained a shrine of memory. Abby's room, her clothes, her school books, everything preserved with quiet reverence. Linda refused to remodel or redecorate, saying it was a place where Abby could still exist even if just in spirit. Linda's advocacy extended beyond the walls of her home. She joined a statewide coalition for families of missing persons, advising law enforcement on communication strategies and urging communities to create support networks. Her voice became one of experience and authority, someone who had lived through every parent's worst nightmare and emerged determined to make a difference. The town itself changed. Abby's disappearance became a touchstone for community awareness. Schools began hosting sessions on personal safety, stranger danger, and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. Local law enforcement instituted a missing persons rapid response protocol, inspired directly by the delays and uncertainties of Abby's case. Parents became hyper-aware, yes, but also more involved in their communities. Neighborhood watch programs flourished, and residents were more willing to check on each other. Abby's case also left a lasting imprint on local journalism. Regional news outlets developed a standard of reporting for missing persons cases, detailed, compassionate, and persistent, a legacy that helped other families in the years to come. For those who had grown up with Abby, friends, classmates, neighbors, the impact was subtle but enduring. Her best friend, Erin, now married with children of her own, often spoke to her own kids about Abby, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder to notice the world, to care for people around you, and to be aware of how fleeting safety can be. Abby changed me, Erin said, not just because she was taken, but because her absence taught us all to be more present, to see the signs, to listen when someone says they're scared. Local law enforcement officers who had worked on the original investigation carried the case with them throughout their careers. Even after retirement, Detective Mike Sanderson continued to mentor young officers, using Abby's case as a study in patience, attention to detail, and the necessity of empathy when dealing with families. Abby Patterson's disappearance also influenced state policy. In 2004, the North Carolina General Assembly passed legislation improving the protocols for handling missing persons, particularly minors and young adults. Law enforcement agencies were required to enter reports into a centralized database immediately, rather than waiting for a specific period, a direct response to the delays that complicated Abby's initial search. Her story was cited in training manuals for search and rescue teams, in workshops for social workers, and in courses for forensic investigators. It became a case study in both tragedy and resolution, illustrating the importance of thorough investigative work and community involvement. For Linda Patterson, the work was personal. She began writing a memoir, documenting her life before Abby disappeared, the harrowing months of searching, the twists of the investigation, and the enduring pain of unanswered questions. I write not for closure, she explained, but so Abby's story remains, so that families know they are not alone, so that the missing are not forgotten. She also worked closely with local schools to implement Abby Patterson Safety Week, an annual program teaching students about boundaries, trust, and self-protection. Each year, she would speak to hundreds of students, sharing Abby's story, her life, her disappearance, and her lasting influence. Her work inspired other families to step forward, to organize vigils, and press law enforcement to take missing person cases seriously. Even in 2015, nearly 2 decades after Abby vanished, her presence was still felt. The Riverside Bridge, where she was last seen, became a quiet spot for reflection, a place where families came to light candles or leave flowers in her honor. Locals who remembered the search still told the story to newcomers, a story of hope, fear, loss, and eventual justice. Abby's story was no longer just about the crime. It had evolved into a narrative of community resilience, of a mother's relentless pursuit of truth, and of a town that refused to forget. We can't change the past, Linda said at a memorial in 2015, but we can shape the future. We can protect our children, support one another, and make sure no one disappears without someone noticing. That is how Abby lives on. Abby Patterson's disappearance left a void that could never be filled. But in that emptiness, something remarkable emerged: awareness, advocacy, and a lasting commitment to the missing. Her family, the town of Clayton, and even strangers who learned her story became custodians of her memory. And while the pain of loss never fully diminishes, Abby's legacy reminds us that even in tragedy, there is purpose. Because remembering is not just about mourning. It's about creating change, inspiring vigilance, and ensuring that those who vanish are never forgotten. Abby Patterson's name lives on in candlelight vigils and legislative change, in a mother's tireless advocacy, and in every heart that refuses to let a missing person fade into silence. The story of Abby Patterson does not end with a court verdict or a headline. It does not conclude neatly, like a closed book. Even years later, the echoes of her life, brief, bright, and tragically cut short, continue to ripple through the small town of Clayton, North Carolina, and through every heart touched by her story. Linda Patterson still lives in the home where Abby grew up, the house that became both a sanctuary and a shrine. Each morning, she rises before dawn, walks through quiet halls, and gazes into her daughter's room. The sunlight streams across the shelves lined with photos, school awards, and letters she could never send. "I still speak to her every day," she says softly. "I tell her about the birds outside, about the neighbors, about the world she should have had. And I wait for the justice that we found, and for the peace that one day might follow." Her life is a mixture of advocacy and memory. She travels to schools, community centers, and law enforcement seminars, sharing Abby's story. Each time she speaks, she emphasizes not just loss, but vigilance, compassion, and the power of community. The town itself bears the marks of what happened. Families who once assumed safety in small town streets learn caution. Parents check windows, lock doors, and teach children to trust but verify. Neighbors speak up instead of turning away. The Riverside Bridge where Abby was last seen has become more than a site of tragedy. It is a place of remembrance, a marker of collective grief and resilience. Candles flicker along the banks during annual vigils. Flowers are left, notes written, and the story of Abby Patterson is passed down to the younger generations. The bridge is silent most of the year, but in the quiet it tells a story. That absence is not the end, that loss leaves a mark, and that memory can be as powerful as presence. Abby's case sparked more than local awareness. Her disappearance influenced state-level policy changes, shaping how law enforcement responds to missing persons today. It highlighted the importance of immediate reporting, thorough investigation, and community involvement. Training manuals for officers reference her case. Social workers use it to educate families. Advocates cited in campaigns to improve support for the missing and their loved ones. Abby's life, though tragically brief, has had an enduring effect on the systems designed to protect others. Jason Weller remains in prison. The court found him guilty, but Abby's final moments and the location of her body remain unknown. This unresolved element is a haunting reminder. Justice can be pursued, but closure is sometimes elusive. For Linda, the verdict brought relief, but it did not erase grief. The absence is still felt in every corner of the Patterson home, in every family holiday, and in the quiet moments when no one else is watching. Yet, even without closure, there is meaning. Linda's tireless advocacy, the vigilance of the community, and the lessons learned from Abby's story are forms of justice that outlast courtroom. Abby Patterson's story is a testament to the fragility of life, the persistence of evil, and the resilience of those left behind. It reminds us that behind every missing person is a family, a community, and a network of people who care deeply. Her story is also a call to action, to notice when someone disappears, no matter how small the town, to speak up when something seems wrong, to hold our communities accountable for vigilance, empathy, and action. Every story shared, every post about the missing, every memory kept alive contributes to a culture that refuses to let disappearances be forgotten. In the end, Abby Patterson is more than a missing person. She is a symbol of hope in the face of despair, of vigilance in the face of danger, and of love that refuses to fade. Her mother's devotion, the community's awakening, and the eventual justice served against Jason Weller all stand as a testament to human resilience. But the story is also a reminder that evil sometimes leaves lasting scars, and that memory, action, and care are the tools we have to confront it. Even decades later, when the wind moves through Clayton's trees and the river glimmers in the sunlight, Abby's name lives on. Not in headlines, not just in court records, but in every heart that refuses to forget her, in every family inspired to protect and fight for their loved ones, and in every community that learns to see what was once invisible. Abby Patterson may have vanished in 1997, but her presence, her story, her legacy, her life, endures. Because sometimes the most powerful way to honor someone lost is not to find them, but to remember them fully, fiercely, and forever. Please subscribe, Like and share this story if you haven't done that already.